Hi, thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm Stephen Timme with Finlistic Solutions, and I'm joined by my friend Ross Van Duzer from Teradata. So we know that you're all very busy, and we just appreciate you taking some time out of your day to join us for the next 30 minutes or so. So my name is Stephen Timme. I'm the founder of Finlistics, and we primarily focus on working with sales organizations in the B2B space to help them better understand their clients and do a better job of showing the real value of their solutions. Ross, introduce yourself, please.
Yes, sir. Hello, Stephen. Hello, everyone. My name is Ross Van Duzer. I'm the Director of Value Engineering at Teradata, and we basically support our sales organization in working with businesses to identify business value of solutions and focus on the business aspect of technology.
Great. And Ross, thanks for joining us today. I know that you're also so very busy, but always enjoying these type of things with you. So let's think about what we call this insight-led selling, and what we call these financial insights fit into this. And Ross, before we go through all the details, let me ask you, why is it so important nowadays that sales professionals have, greater insights into what their clients are trying to accomplish, as opposed to maybe even, I know you and I met like 20 years ago, and the world has changed since then quite a bit, but why is it so important for these sales professionals to have these kind of insights?
Well, I think and you're right, Steve, it's been a long time and there's been quite a bit of changes, but I think from our perspective, Teradata itself, is our company looks at it that we need to go out and solve business problems. And I think if the sales folks are strictly dealing with IT, and that's kind of the old methodology of selling, they're focused on the technology or talking technology, but I think everyone has come to realize that the business is really where the value is. And it's important now, if you're selling, to sell into the business and have the technology and the IT infrastructure, if you will, to support what you need on the business side to drive business value. So, it's important for those salespeople, obviously, to then understand what their customers' initiatives are and what's driving financial benefits and values to their organization.
Okay, and Ross, let me ask you, so let's say I'm a VP of supply chain and I'm trying to do a better job of managing my inventories, that balancing act between having an in-stock position but not having too much inventories, and I'm just really interested in doing a much better job of forecasting. Will I be impressed when you come up to me and say, hey, our technology can do 10,000 forecasts in a minute? Is that impressive?
No, I don't think so. I mean, that's maybe a starting point, but I think ultimately what you're getting, you kind of have to get to the real nuts and bolts of it in terms of either analytics or information that will drive better capabilities in those areas. So just exactly. The number of queries, number of reports, things like that don't really add business value.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start at a top level, and we're going to drill down to financial insights. But when we think about at Finlistics, what we call this insight-led selling is it really has three parts of it. One is what we call these business insights, and what this is really saying is, what are executives really trying to get done? What are their goals? What are their strategies? Just what do they think about, every day? And this is all done within the context of an industry. So look at all the disruption as an example that's taking place in the various industries. And so they're not making these decisions in this vacuum. It's in the context of their industries and the disruptors in that. And then what we finally get to is what we call these financial insights, which is really, how are they doing financially? What's going to be the impact of your solutions on their overall cash flow? So with that, let's get started on the financial insights. And Ross, before we get into some of the stuff we have on the slides and that, why is it so important that sales professionals have this financial perspective when looking at their clients?
Well, I think, and by the way, we didn't discuss it in my introduction, but being a former CFO and now being on this side of the desk, I mean, I can appreciate, the viewpoint, and when you're discussing with executives in an organization, the things that are top of mind to them. and most likely it's going to be financially focused. They care on a day-to-day basis. They're focused on what's driving the financial value and the bottom line impact to their business. So from a salesperson perspective, they need to understand that. They need to understand what the initiatives of the company are and what these executives will be focused on. And I think probably what we're going to get into, Stephen, is exactly that. It's focusing on those drivers and those metrics that are key to executives that are driving financial, value and bottom line data to them.
Yeah, and Ross, you former CFO, my background is finance, work with a lot of finance folks as well as other executives. But you and I really enjoy this. But we also don't get invited to family reunions either. But so my question is, for someone to effectively use this, do they have to be a financial expert? Do they have to have their MBA in finance to have these, to make this a part of the discussion with client executives?
No, I think there's obviously homework involved, but the good news is, from my perspective, my role at Teradata is that Teradata has an organization that supports the sales teams in these efforts. That's exactly what our value engineering group does. Those organizations that aren't fortunate enough to have a value engineering organization or financial people to support them, they need to leverage something, and we're going to get into this, and I'm a big fan of Finlistics, as you know, but they need to leverage information and data that will arm them with the appropriate information to deliver that message. And you touched on it briefly, but I think the other thing we're going to highlight is you need to make that connection between what you're selling and what financial impact it's going to have. It's not just about the financial impact, because anybody can throw a number out there, but ultimately that executive is going to care, well, that's great. How are you going to actually help me deliver that? And why are you any different than anyone else? So I think these salespeople, they don't need to be financial experts. They just need to understand what metrics are important to the executives and how to talk to them. And they have to be somewhat conservative and close to the vest about that. We're going to get into that, I think, when we talk about the details here.
Yeah. And, Ross, you said something that is really important to me, is that for everyone out there, this is not to go have a financial discussion with the client. That's not what they want. What they really want is, okay, how do you tell me the story, and then weave in certain financial components, because there's some of the things that we really focus on. So I want to make it very, very clear up front. The people at Teradata, for example, are very, very blessed to have Ross and others on his team. But even if you don't have that backup, just think about how you're going to impact these metrics, and then we can talk later about the how much. So let's do this. Let's look at what we call this financial drivers map. Now, this is for what we call the goods and services companies. So that's going to be like retail and, manufacturing, those type of things. But, then we could put one together for financial services, for banking, and we could create another one for insurance. So they would have, some metrics would be in common, but other ones would be more specific. But what I want to do with this is that, within each one of the industries, when you start thinking about these drivers map, there's really only 2 or 3 financial metrics that really, using the 80-20 rule, that you're really, really going to be focused on. Now, everyone's always focused on revenue growth, so that's common across all the industries. But when we start breaking things down into profitability, it could be, if I'm a wholesale distributor, well, gosh, 90-something% of my revenues are absorbed by cost of goods sold. So it's not to say I don't care about selling general administrative, but if you're going to go in and help them, say, I can help you take a little bit out of cost of goods sold, that's going to be pretty significant. Or, if I'm a utility industry, fixed asset utilization, or, what I have to invest in assets to generate revenues is huge compared to, say, wholesale distribution. So I'm going to be very, very focused on that. So the point I want to make here is, we're not going to go through all of these, but within each industry, think about those 2 or 3 metrics that the executives care about and your solutions have, the greatest impact. And I know, Ross, you use things like this all the time, but what guidance would you give our participants today, or audience today, in terms of how you think about those 2 or 3 key metrics?
Yeah, I think, Stephen, to your point, you never look at all of these, and once again, you have to do your homework up front. I mean, the goal is you have to know what your solutions and what you're delivering actually impacts. And I think once you've got your arms around that and you've identified it, it actually does narrow it down and pretty much, focuses you in on the area that you want to, deliver that message to for a customer. I mean, there's many areas on the financial statements that I would tell you Teradata doesn't impact or doesn't, affect. And I think that's true with a lot of companies. So to your point, you want to make sure you're identifying and you're talking to the ones that you actually can deliver a solution and a capability around. And I think, that's how we spend our time. And the other point is I don't think this is ever intended to be a silver bullet. This is intended to be supplemental to any other research and work that you do in preparation for your accounts and your account planning. And the value in this is leveraging this information to make that connection. So again, I think the first step is identifying what solutions and what benefits you bring to your customer and which financial metric they actually impact.
Okay, all right. Now, I want to stop there and see if there's any questions from the audience. So, because I know, a lot of times I was formerly a professor of finance, and I know that finance is not a lot of people's favorite topics. So, this can be kind of challenging. But I want to stop there and see if there's any questions from the audience. So, if you would use that feature, the pull-down menu, and then type in any questions that Ross and I can answer for you. So, we'll give that just a moment while you, again, if there's any questions from the audience. Okay, let's see. Here's a good one. Yeah, how do you identify what are those 2 or 3 metrics, per industry that executives are most focused on? So, Ross, what is your? Because there's all kinds of metrics out there. So let's say I'm kind of new to this, and we all know that revenue growth is always in the top 3. But what insights would you give someone who's kind of new to this, or maybe they've been introduced to a new industry, right? Let's say they've been selling into retail, now they're selling into banking. So, or I got to sell across industries. Maybe I have 5 or 6 different industries I sell into. So, what insights would you give in terms of identifying those 2, maybe 3 financial metrics?
Yeah. I think from my perspective, again, a lot of it's, you can read some 10Ks, you can listen to the earnings call, you can look at the annual report and look at the letter to shareholders. Typically, that's a pretty good insight into what they're focused on. I mean, the CEO is typically talking about those things that are important to them, and you can relate to that typically to one of these metrics. The other thing I would say, and what we've leveraged a great deal of at Teradata, is beyond this map that you have on the screen right now, you guys have done a great job building out lower level KPIs and drivers and process maps for these industries. And I can tell you they've been a huge hit with our sales teams. It's helped us make that connection between what we deliver and those metrics. I mean, for example, in revenue growth, I mean, you're not even showing any here, but even in operating income, what you're showing, there's 50 to 100 lower level metrics that we lean on that allow us to connect our solutions to those. So I think trying to uncover the solutions and this process map in terms of the actual business activity that a solution can impact, I think is the real starting point.
Okay, good. I agree completely. If you listen to the earnings calls, or you read the 10K report, and the point there is you may say, well, I've got a whole bunch of private companies. They don't publish that kind of information. Well, even if they're private companies, they typically have some publicly traded peers. So just look at the management discussion section, and as they talk about profitability, they'll say, okay, well, our input cost was up significantly, and therefore our gross profit margin or gross cost of goods sold was changed. So they'll give you a lot of insight as to what they're really, really focused on. And again, look for those 2 or 3, and then maybe you don't impact all 3 of them. Maybe you're in a situation where you're focused on expenses or assets, or you're really about helping them grow revenues and do it in a more profitable way. That's okay. I mean, as an executive, if you can communicate with me how you're going to help me achieve goals around one of those metrics, I'll listen to you. And Ross, a nice segue into this next slide, because a lot of times people see the numbers. Okay, revenue growth. We can help you improve revenue growth. We help clients improve revenue growth 3 to 5%. What? That's not very credible. Yeah. So, like we talked about earlier, Ross. Well, tell me how. If we've talked about this before. If you come in and tell me, hey, I believe I can improve your revenue growth 3 to 5%. I'm going to pull this lever next to my chair, my desk, and that salesperson is going to fall through and we'll never see him again, hopefully. So the point I want to make here is this is the how. I was working with a CFO a number of years ago, and I absolutely loved it. He always said the how and then the how much. So these operational key performance indicators, and if you want to sound real consultant-like, you can call them KPIs and charge more. But, I mean, this is really the how. So think about how your solutions could reduce churn. How would your solutions make your clients' products or customer experience more attractive and get new customers? So think about how these things break down, and use this to talk about the how. So Ross, help in terms of guidance you would give the group in terms of thinking about the how part before the how much.
Yeah, and this is a good screen for us, Stephen, because at Teradata we're focused on a lot of analytics, and a good portion of our analytic message right now is around, if you will, customer journey. So what you have up here in terms of customer churn, cross-sell, upsell, new customers, there's other things, but those three are very key to our messaging around the analytics of customer journey and improving that experience, if you will, and all have an impact on revenue growth. And I think to your point, our job at Teradata, the sales team and the value engineering group, our job is to make sure we can communicate to the customer how, in fact, do we impact those? How can we actually help them reduce customer churn or improve cross-sell, upsell? We have to figure that out first before we can talk numbers. But then, the next step is then to look at it and say, well, we've done proof of concepts, or we've done proof of value, we've worked with customers, and we've seen these kinds of improvements. And you do the math afterwards. But the key really, again, going back to it, is you have to make sure you have the solution and the capability to impact one of these operational KPIs. Otherwise, somebody's just going to look at you, to your point, they're going to pull the lever and say, okay, I don't need to talk to you anymore. And you can do this for each one of the metrics. I mean, even something like day sales outstanding, right? We could look at things like, what's the percentage that's overdue, what percentage of invoices get sent out that are, error-free, what was the on-time delivery. I mean, so what I would encourage everyone out there to do, pick those couple of metrics you have an impact on. Again, you don't have to impact all of them. And start thinking about, from an operational perspective, what is it you do that help them improve these individual operational KPIs? Okay, so let's do this. Let me back up. I saw a question come in. So Ross, back on this one, how do I get started? What if I'm either more comfortable talking to speeds and feeds, or what do you suggest in terms of, okay, here, we know these are the financial areas and we've got some ideas, but, I think the listing of the operational KPIs is not so challenging, but how do I just start telling my story? What guidance can you give in terms of how do I start doing a better job of telling the story about how, a company it can potentially improve their clients' financial performance around specific metrics? Hopefully you have some resources in your organization you can go to that know exactly what your technology does, because, it's not something you're going to learn in school necessarily. It's one of those things that people who are developing your solutions and your technology, they're developing it for a reason, right? And they should have an understanding of what that benefit's how they're going to deliver benefit to a customer around these operational KPIs. Otherwise, there's no reason to develop it. So without a doubt, it's a team effort. I mean, I think salespeople, to your point, Stephen, they don't have to be financial experts, and I don't think there's many people that want to go in and have that financial message. But I think what they better do is start looking at business process and the capabilities that drive those business activities.
Yeah, yeah, and I would encourage everyone. I mean, use common sense terms like Ross and I use things like business process maps and operational KPIs. It's just so we sound smarter than we really are. But anyway, I just use common sense terms. So now let's talk about these financial insights. What do we need to know? So the one is what's happening to your client's financial performance. What's it doing over time? How's it compare to its competitors? How's it compare to its industry? We're going to do an example of that. And then we also have we call a gap analysis. So what you're finding, as an example, a lot of retail stores, and we all are experiencing this, is revenue growth is declining. As an example, or what we're finding in the telecom industry is that growth is declining, but we're actually finding profitability is increasing. So the gap analysis is, compared to your best performing year, compared to your best performing peers, and we all know those are, that's a scary thing comparing one company to another because no two companies do the exact same thing. But what's the value of the gap? And we're going to do an example of that, and then finally, and it's really an iterative process. How much cash flow can you generate for me? What's the return on investment, or what's the payback? Those type of things. So, Ross, a chart like this is really exciting to you and I and our other finance friends. It usually terrifies other people, but in this case, what we've got is a company, and actually the one we're following is the one at the very bottom. I know it's kind of hard to see. And we've compared it over time, the last 5 years, and we've also looked at it relative to peers. Now, I mentioned this earlier, the word peer, because no two companies do the exact same thing, it gets a little tougher, so sometimes you have to look at line of businesses to line of businesses. But the reality is, for your clients internally do this type of analysis. I mean, everyone's always benchmarking themselves to, what's the better performers in the industry, or how good are we, those type of things. So, Ross, my question is, what do I do with this?
And that's a great question, Stephen. I mean, immediately, the knee-jerk reaction is you look at this and you say, "Oh, the customer I'm dealing with is, they're the worst, right? Their revenue growth is going down. So, what kind of a message can I deliver to them?" People are going to jump to the conclusion that, "Oh, this should be easy, because they look so bad. I should be able to go in there and tell them, God, I can do all things. Yeah, I can do everything to help you improve your revenue growth because you guys are so terrible." But you have to take this apart in pieces, and we're going to get even further into this, where you just can't jump to those conclusions. You have to look at what's behind those numbers and what's behind those trends. Who knows? They may have had a divestiture during, in that fourth year, where all of a sudden, their revenue went down. So you have to be careful. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't make comments that you're not comfortable with. But still looking at what are you doing differently than some of your competitors or peers? And by the way, if some of those competitors or peers happen to be your customer, maybe you have a great story to tell there about how you're helping them, and you might want to lead with that. So that's how you start to digest this information.
Yeah, and Ross, you brought up a really good point. Now, this is a retail company, and it doesn't take a lot of time. We all know you're very, very busy, right? You got quota to make, most of you, that type of thing. And so with just a little bit of research, and I'm familiar with this company, you can say, well, they're a retailer, well, they're closing stores. Well, that in of itself should reduce revenues. And I'm saying they get a pass on that one. Or, foot traffic is down, or average ticket size is down, or a comparable store. So I can very quickly start thinking about some of the factors that are driving this. And so, Ross, do I go in? So let's say I'm talking to this a retailer, and I'm going to go talk to like the chief marketing officer, or I'm talking to the chief, merchandising officer, something like that. Do I walk in with this chart and say, let's talk about your financial performance? How do we weave this into the discussion with the client?
Well, again, it's kind of stepping on shells, right? I mean, you tell them that you've done your research, and maybe not that bluntly, but obviously the message is we've done some research. We've looked into, we're looking at it hopefully from the same perspective you are, from a business perspective and from a financial perspective. And we've seen some things in your financial numbers that indicate there may be areas that we can help you in. We've helped other customers. we have capabilities that might address some cost issues or some revenue issues that you're experiencing. That's what we'd like to talk to you about. Regardless of, really what your financials look like, it's an indication that there's something going on. And we certainly know what we deliver, and we know that it impacts these financial metrics, so there may be a match there. And that the whole point of the exercise is to kind of work in conjunction with your customer and say, is there something here? We've taken the approach at Teradata that if there's nothing there, we walk away. I mean, the whole idea is our goal should be to help our customers optimize and perform the best that they can perform. If that happens to not include a Teradata solution, then there's nothing in it for either party. There's no reason to pursue that. So you just kind of look at it from that perspective and say, we've seen some activity in your financial metrics that indicate that are in an area that we have capabilities and technologies that may help you. And we'd like to talk to you about that and uncover maybe some of the drivers and some of the things that are impacting that performance.
Yeah, and so for everyone out there, takeaway from this is you need to look at this, right? And this influences a lot of their decision making. So, for example, let's say your client is the one at the very bottom here. They're probably going to be looking more tactical decisions as opposed to strategic decisions. But the point being, don't share this chart and don't go, we noticed that your revenue growth has gone from 4.3 down to minus 1.5 or whatever it is. My recommendation, and everyone develops their own style, is, talk about things on a relative basis. Preparing for this, look at your financials so we can better identify areas that we can help, you improve. And, no news here. We notice that, your revenue growth has dropped and, relative to your peers. So the other thing I want to note is that the peer comparison, because most people know their trends, but what the peer comparison is where you're going to have the best discussions. And again, you don't have to say, your profit margin's 5.3 and theirs is 8.3. Just say, we've noticed that, their margins are higher than yours. Here's some things that we've seen that have separated, are the better performers. So what they're really looking for is insights around, hey, what can you tell me I don't know? All right. Now, we talked earlier about valuing the gap. And what this does, and there's a lot of numbers here, but let's look at, I know it's really, really hard to see, but selling, general, and administrative. So SG&A, a lot of store costs are going to be in there for a retailer, those type of things. So one of the things that we've noticed is that it's, they're highest in 5 years. So those are just the numbers, right? Those are just the percentages. Well, what a lot of your clients do internally is they'll say, okay, here's the number for this year. What was our best year, or what's our best performing peer, whoever it might be, and they value the gap. That's what this last column is. So in this example, it says, well, if they had repeated their fiscal year 2017 and were able to have the same level of SG&A on a percentage basis as just a few years ago, well, their profits would be $600 million higher. Or another way of thinking about it is they've got $600 million more in selling general administrative than in their best performing year. So this is what we call valuing the gap. Now, Ross, what do I do with this? Do I walk in and tell you, hey, Ross, what I'm thinking is you probably have got $600 million on the table we could go take out? Is that how I use this?
I would highly recommend not doing that. No, I mean, it gives you an indication of, again, kind of a trend in an area, right? But there's a lot of things that could be going on there. So this is where, again, we pursue it from the perspective of, let's talk about that area. Let's talk about things that are going on. And by the way, let's hope that we have a solution or capability that helps them in SG&A. It may be specifically in sales. It may be in marketing. It may be in finance. Who knows? But the other thing is that $601 million is all of those categories. It's R&D. It's things that are categorized in SG&A. You may not have a solution that addresses all of them. So you first you have to break it down into that. And so you may only be looking at 20% of that SG&A number that you can actually impact. And then and again, you have to have a solution that kind of impacts that. And I think, Stephen, on the last screen in here also, a key is that you can't. Don't think you're going to go in there and tell them something about their numbers that they don't already know. They live and breathe this stuff every single day. So to tell them that their trend is doing something, or to tell them that they're this or they're that, or they're 10% worse than last year, that's not the discussion you want to have. You want to have a productive discussion around how you can actually help them, and maybe reverse that trend. That's more the conversation.
Yeah. And so, reports like this is really more in preparation. I don't recommend you show stuff like this to the client, because part of it is just, it's a distraction. There's a lot of numbers here, and then some people start looking at, well, wait a minute, it's not 3208, it's 321 or where. So it's really the reference, and for you to say, where are the big gaps? Maybe you can do something about it, maybe you can't. Like if this was manufacturing, and I'm looking at things like I'm a provider of, the technology that enables, IoT, I'm really thinking more about cost of goods sold, not so much SG&A. So just food for thought. So, this in preparation for you to see where are the big gaps. It explains a lot of why they might be really focused on, streamlining the organization, right-sizing the organization around SG&A. So that makes more sense. But just to get a sense for where the big rocks are.
Yeah. And Stephen, that's a good point. That a lot of times we use these schedules to determine an area that has significant financial value. For example, the screen that you're on right now, you may want to identify. Obviously, cost of goods sold drives the biggest number there. But the other thing you have to know is they may have strategic things or regulatory things that they have to do regardless of the value. Mm-hmm. So you need to be in tune with those as well. So to your point, all of this is preparing yourself for that conversation and leveraging in terms of the fact that we can actually make an impact on those financial performance numbers.
Yeah, and Ross, a good example of that is if you look at the banking in particular, and after the the crash in 2007, 2008, and then all the increased regulation around that. Well, one of the things that you saw is for banks, what we call their cost to income ratio, or what we call in the U.S. their efficiency ratio, went up. And then we started digging into it, you could see where, there was a significant increased cost in complying with regulation. And that wasn't, I didn't have the option. I choose not to do this. So, or, you look at oil and gas, right now, and you look at the collapse in the prices over the last couple of years, well, you'll see that their margins have changed significantly. These gaps are going to be huge. So you really got to put in the context of what's going on. Now, this is what we call the power of one. And what it does, so let's think about that selling general administrative. We saw on the previous slide, if they could go back to their best performing year, that's $600 million. And Ross, as you talked about, the likelihood of you capturing that $600 million for this client is pretty low, right? Because most companies aren't all things to all people. So this is just called the power of one. And it says, well, what if? What if you could take, maybe not knowing how you're going to do that yet, what if you could take 1% out? And in this example, that'd be worth, a little bit over $80 million. So, Ross, what do you do with this? I mean, the calculation's easy, and you can very quickly see where's the biggest, in this case, dollars, whatever currency we're dealing with. But in terms of preparing to talk to the customer or even with the customer, let's say I was focused on SG&A, and so now I know a 1% improvement's $83 million. What do I do with that?
Well, I think to your point, first of all, most C-level folks look at, it's very common for them to look at things in small increments like this because, when you talk budgets, when you talk anything performance, they typically say, what is 1% going to get me? How significant is that? So that's one of the things we really like about this is it puts it into a number that people can get their arms around as opposed to going in with that $600 million number, right? The blue sky, like, oh yeah, we can save you billions of dollars. I think it's much easier to digest this. But to the point about like SG&A here, the idea is that that's just 1% improvement. So now, again, you have to peel back the onion. You have to look at what makes up that number, and you have to look at the capabilities of what you can have an impact on. But I think if you're talking to companies in terms of this 1% and an $82 or $83 million opportunity, what it does is it stimulates the conversation. It gets their attention. I mean, because those are those are meaningful numbers. They're not crazy. 1% is certainly reasonable. I mean, let's face it, when people put their budgets together, they look for 3 to 5% budget cuts. Well, if you can go in and help somebody reduce 1% in a particular area through a capability where they're not actually just having to cut heads and they're much more effective or efficient, they're going to listen to you because that just 1% is going to help them achieve that budget objective. So that's kind of how you have to look at it.
Yeah, and you said something, Ross, in terms of, one way to think about this is, so the 1%, let's just call it $80 million, but 1% is $80 million. So you and I have had this discussion. You told me, hey, I'm focused on these areas. Here's some of the things I'm trying to get done within these areas, either in terms of personnel cost or more effective marketing or contact center. So, for everyone out there, before you jump into something like this, you've already had this pretty good discussion about what they're focused on, how they think about getting it done. And so, I could say, well, Ross, just a little back of the envelope calculation, we're estimating for your company, each 1% reductions or about $80 million. And then, for everyone out there, I would follow up and say, Ross, what kind of, I didn't see anything out there, but, what kind of reduction or benefits are you looking for? And they say, gosh, if we could get 1%, we'd be very happy. Or, my CFO's told me I better go find 3% this year. So it's a way to bring the discussion back to a financial focus without it being a totally financially focused one, but, keep creating this image in your client's mind, the executive's mind, that, we're really here to help you improve your performance.
Yep.
Now, that's, and this is a really hard slide to read. So we looked at the gap, and let's say SG&A, or it could be revenue growth, it could be anything. And then we start thinking about this power of one, okay? But then, earlier we talked about the how. So how are you going to help me do this? So just like we had power of one for the financial metrics, we can do the same thing around the operational metrics. So let's say that they said, look, we're really focused on growth, and we know that each 1%, I'm going to go back here, each 1% improvement in revenue growth is worth around almost $20 million. Well, now we'll start peeling that back. So what this is that earlier slide where we had revenue growth and some of the operational KPIs. But now what we can do is say, for a company your size, Ross, if you look like the industry average, because more than likely at this stage in the sales process, you probably don't know what their churn is. You don't know what percentage of customers revenues come from new customers. And so it's pretty straightforward. You could start getting some industry data and say, well, in this industry, cross-sell, upsell accounts for 8% of revenues or whatever it might be. So what this allows us to do is, let's say, Ross, you said, yeah, I'd love to get 1%. That would be, would be great. Then what I can do is start saying, well, Ross, you've shared with me your one of the areas you're trying to focus on is new customers. And, we estimate for a company your size that each 1% improvement's worth, in this case, like $3 million. I know that's very, very hard to read. So just like we did the financial metrics, you can then pull in a couple of these operational metrics where you can have an impact and tell your story about how you can impact those. And then as part of that conversation, I always say for a company your size. I would never say, Ross, for your company, because I don't know you well enough yet. We're still going through the dating process, right? So I strongly recommend people to peel this back that next layer. So Ross, your thoughts on this? I know there's something that you use quite a bit in at Teradata and other organizations you've been with.
Yeah, I've used this quite a bit, and I think one of the key things you touched on, Steve, it still goes back to we need to have identified which one of these our solution actually impacts. Because the ultimate question is going to be, well, that's great. How can you help me with this? And usually, more importantly, why are you any different than anyone else? I got 5 different vendors telling me they can help me get new customers. So this, again, all of this is in preparation of teeing up your solution and your capability. And salespeople should be comfortable with that because that goes back to exactly what you sell. So now you're out of the financial discussion, your capabilities, but you've connected it to a financial message.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so now we've had this discussion, and now they're saying, okay, what is my return on investment? What is my payback? And Ross, I'm sure you've seen this a lot. What I always find interesting is, some clients want you to be very involved in the business case. Other clients are like, no, just tell us what you can do for us, and then we're going to go behind the screen like Wizard of Oz, and we're going to put the business case together. So, and that seems to happen more often than not. So how do you, first of all, what's the benefit of staying involved in the development of the business case? And the second question is, if people are saying we don't really need you involved, just tell us what you can do for us and tell us how much it's going to cost. So, one, what's the benefits of staying involved, and then what is your guidance about, staying involved?
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. So, being involved and staying involved, I think, is critical because just throwing the numbers over the wall or just throwing the message over the wall, it loses a lot, and then basically you've lost the opportunity to really, again, differentiate yourselves. First of all, this whole process allows you to be a much better business partner, if you will, with your customer, talking about the improvements and focus on their business. Again, all of a sudden now you're not talking to me about technology. You really care about my business, and you want to make sure that you, as a salesperson, you need to make sure they get the message and that they build this out correctly. Now, to your point, Stephen, we have this all the time. We basically tell our customers, we'll present this in any format that you want. If you have a typical, request for funding form, or if you have some kind of a budgeting form that you have to submit for your projects, we're more than happy to support that. It doesn't have to be in this format, but let us help you. And what I've found is most people will not typically look at it in the perspective like the payback in months or the month of delay or the cost of delay in the monthly terms, because they don't do that work. They look at ROI and they look at net present value maybe. Most of the customers, if you present this to them, they find this to be valuable supplemental information, and they leverage it in their business cases. Whether it's your exact format or not, they put it into theirs, but you've at least been the support behind that.
Right. And Ross, we only have a few minutes left, but for everyone out there, I really focus on monthly cost of delay. So in this example, it's about $800,000 a month. So think about our friends in procurement trying to get the best price. But let's say I'm selling into a chief marketing officer who's trying to grow revenues and grow profits. Procurement can't beat me up enough to make up for those lost profits or revenues. So with that, real quick, Ross, we got about 2 minutes left. I'm going to have you take this one because you've stood up a number. You've lived this for a number of years. But so someone says, okay, I want to get there from here. I'm kind of new to this. What would be the couple of things that you would recommend that they do? And again, we got about 2 minutes left.
Yeah, I think first thing goes back to identify exactly what you deliver. Make sure you're comfortable with your solution, with your capability, and whether you can do it as a salesperson or whether certainly within your organization, you need to identify what financial metric that impacts. And it's fairly easy to do. People in the organization will know how to do it. But that's absolutely the connection you have to make. And then when you start to look at these financial information, all this data, and you're starting to prepare for your customer, you at least know which metric you want to key in on, and you look for the ones that have the trends that you're looking for. You certainly don't want to first attack something that they're doing very, very well in. If they've got some issues in other areas that you have technology and capabilities that will help that area. And I think the key is working with them through the process. Your goal should be to work with them on the business side to identify that financial impact and the capability that will deliver that benefit. And getting back even to the last screen, Stephen, in terms of what value or why do you stay with them, I think the post activity is really where you want to stay. You want to work with them to track and measure and figure out whether or not the benefits are being delivered.
Great. No, thanks. So, and if you would, in terms of feedback from audience, how useful was this webinar? Also, other webinars that we've got lined up we've already done some around executive insights, but we're going to get more specific around industries, looking at things like how do you build a better business case, how do you sell the value of IoT. But, we view these as your webinar, so please, where it says feedback from audience, if there's some topic areas you'd like for us to address, please let us know. And in terms of getting more information, if you would, you can go to the Finlistics website. You can also reach out to us at info@finlistics.com, as well as call us at 678-680-4261. So, Ross, thank you so much for your time, and everyone out there today, appreciate your time, and let us hear from you. So with that, we'll conclude things, and thanks, everybody.